partnerships take time and you need to invest in them, and that's a really important part of this. The other thing I think is something else we already talked about, like, what do we have to offer? I think oftentimes leaders are like, "Oh, it would be great to ride this rocket ship." And I'm like, "Of course it would be." Like that that's what everyone wants to do. But what rocket ship are we offering to them to really help them? And I think that has to be the first thing that a partnership leader figures out with leaders and executives of like, what can we give to these other partners?
All right, Lizzie Chapman, thank you for spending time with me today to talk about all things partnership. As I was saying before, our team has been reaching out to yours, and we've got some exciting things to talk about because you have had quite the career to date in partnerships and seem to be somebody who's on the tools. And I love getting into the weeds on things relating to technology partnerships. So welcome.
Thank you. There's nothing more I like to chat about than partnerships. So I am excited to be here.
Amazing. Well, let's dive straight in so people can get the right context about who you are and what you've done in your career. So, what is the Lizzie Chapman backstory?
Yeah. So you want me to go all the way back, hear the whole journey?
Let's do it.
Yeah, I started my career, I kind of like uh stumbled my way into an ad network. I had a friend that I played hockey in college, and she was working at this ad network, Burst Media, and helped me get a job, and did account management for ad campaigns there. And during that time is when Programmatic was starting. Really, it was the days of AdMeld and Yahoo and RMX was their platform and whatnot. And so uh we needed someone to lead the partnerships for it, and I raised my hand and moved into my first partnerships role there, managing our demand side partners, um which I found out I loved. I remember initially being like, well, I don't really like selling, but I don't just want to do account management, but this BD thing seems like a good in between for me. And so I really enjoyed it. Moved to a few other SSPs from there. I worked at OpenX, which was exciting. Moved me from the Boston area to New York, a bigger SSP with a bigger name, and just could acquire some more substantial partnerships. And then over to Teads, which was a video platform, which was exciting. Video was an up and coming format at the time. And so that I had a lot of fun with that. That was also, they were based in France. And unlike a lot of ad tech companies, they, of the size they're about 500 people. They had 28 offices. So they're really good at getting into local markets all over the
Mm,
world. And that was such a great experience to work and partner with the team in APAC or Latin America or wherever, and really learn about those individual nuances of different regions. Then I did a short stint on the agency side. I went to VaynerMedia, and I wanted to get some experience with the buy side and using different tools outside of programmatic. Uh, the fun part about that was managing a 30-person team. For the size of companies I work at in partnerships, you might have 10 people. And so I had
mm.
this large team. It was a lot of people development. Can't say I loved the client management at the agency, and I really missed working on a tech platform. That's I think I lean heavily into the product side of partnerships, and I miss doing that. I was constantly pitching Gary Vaynerchuk that we should build a tech platform, and he was like, "But we're an agency," and so I went back to ad tech, landed at AdRoll next role, and have had a few roles here as well. So I started on what we called platform services. It's where we worked with companies that wanted to white label our ad platform and embed ads in their platform or extend what they were doing. And then COVID happened, and so we reorged a couple months after I joined and kind of restructured our business. And they were like, "Will you do Martech partnerships for AdRoll?" And I started managing and building relationships with Shopify and WooCommerce and Klaviyo and that whole world. Eventually took on RollWorks partnerships, which is our B2B platform. So HubSpot and Salesforce and LinkedIn, and got very into that world. And now as we pivot a little bit back to ad tech, I get to do the MarTech side of partnerships and the ad tech side of partnerships, which is fun to have feet in both.
Yeah, I mean, let's go back a second to, and this will age me, but there was a time when the idea of programmatic advertising and ad placement was not a thing, where there was a very heavily manual, very large workflow of people that were involved in not just selling media spots, but actually doing creative and making sure it was delivered on the right time. And this happened across all media, which I guess back in the day gave rise to a massive industry that was there to do this very complicated but very exciting kind of workflow kind of
Yep.
circumstance. And then programmatic started to make its way in. And this idea, I remember the idea of there being an algorithmic way of being able to very crudely A/B test, put in many different types of creative, have it slot into the right places, not just on visual media, but also in audio, when we started getting into video, and it just became such a disruptive force. And we look back now and we just go, well, no one would know any
Of
different now.
course.
It's
Yeah.
such a straightforward thing, right?
Yeah. I remember because I was, when I entered the industry, at least there were ad networks. So I worked for a company that aggregated all the publishers together, and then they were using a publisher ad server to actually pick, like, do we want to send this impression to this ad network or this ad network? It wasn't a bidding system for them. They had to choose that, right? And I remember optimizing campaigns, and there we had this tool called the optimizer, and there was like a slider bar to optimize CTR or CPA, and basically you're moving the slider and just dropping sites off the list, as opposed to what happens now with the predictive AI that all these bidders have, which is like it finds the person at the right time in the right place. Maybe they're not good this day, but they'll be good this other day for this campaign or whatever it may be. And it's crazy to think about how far things have come.
It is quite something, and a long way to go as well, because as we've all been on the receiving end of different ads, some can feel strangely quite convenient when they land at the right time. It's like, oh, I was looking at that. On the other side, there's sort of the creepiness of, wait, what? How does it know that I needed to see this, or I've been thinking about this? And
When
others
you're
would just miss the
talking,
mark altogether.
yeah, when you're talking and then Instagram shows you an ad you were talking about, that's always fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is always fun. So tell me, Lizzie, when we sort of think about the two brands you mentioned before, AdRoll and RollWorks, two different kind of product verticals and businesses, why is your business involved in those two areas? What's the heritage of its involvement in those two different areas?
Yeah, so AdRoll has been around for over 15 years now. And we were a buying platform back in the day for customers, and operating in different ways at that time through ad networks and other things. And as Programmatic started to develop, we built a bidder before my time, obviously, and became very heavily focused on performance advertising. In that we realized, I would say it's probably about 6 years ago now, that there was a great market growing in e-commerce and D2C brands around performance advertising, and not a tool that was accommodating all sizes. Often if you're a very large D2C brand, then yeah, there's plenty of options for you. But if you're a growing emerging brand, there wasn't as many. And so AdRoll thought that that would be a great place to plug in there. On the other side, on the RollWorks side, B2B, there wasn't really a great advertising tool for account-based advertising. There's all
Mm.
kinds of account-based marketing platforms, but not account-based advertising. And so, with the performance bidder and core technology that we had, we felt as though we could make a big impact in that space, and went and built ABM features on top of the bidder we already have to accommodate uh, for customers there. Somewhat similar, on our ABM side, we work with a lot of mid-market customers, but on the ABA side is where we see a real enterprise need for that performance. And so we had split the go-to-market brands up to really make a claim in those two industry verticals. And so far it's gone well. And what our thoughts were on the core technology being impactful in those two verticals.
Tell me about how the partnership landscape's evolved over the last 10, 15 years. Certainly while you've been there, we have gone through the shakeout, which was COVID. There was a bunch of changes. I know in our part of the world where we, at a corporate level, there was quite a significant amount of outsourcing that we would do to other countries for different services. Throughout COVID, there was big moves to bring that back on shore. And, there was a huge amount of flexing going on across just about every industry. Very few were disrupted. But the need to have exceptionally strong partnerships to deal with that flex, to learn and understand how you do business during really complicated times, has no doubt made it very different across industry. But how have you found that in the verticals you work in? Because there's some very big brands that you all work with. They've had to evolve as well. How have you seen that playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I think like the thing that with COVID happening, e-commerce marketplaces exploded, right? So like the Shopifys of the world did really, really well during that time period because a lot of people were starting new businesses. We've seen that wane since, right? We've seen a lot of store closures happen, and the companies that are more stable are still remain within that. So it was almost like it was a good thing, right? Everyone was spending money, and there we saw that growth in e-commerce, but then it kind of leveled itself back out there. What I'll say on so channel partners for us is really ultimately media agencies or consultants. And I think that's an ever-growing, evolving space. I mean, there's the big six holding companies that manage a lot of the spend in the space. But what you're seeing is more and more independents getting some real traction there because the holding companies are like just huge, sometimes red tape machines that creative brands like D2C or a startup in the B2B world want someone that will be creative and partner with them and move quickly. And so those holding companies will always exist. They will always have the big brands, like they are not going anywhere, and they have the opportunity to buy these independent agencies and get some cool brands underneath them. But I think we're seeing on the channel side that like independent agencies are getting more and more budget and becoming they're becoming more niche and specific and therefore more appealing to the brands that would connect with that. I could go into the ad tech landscape, but like it has its ups and downs over and over again. I think it's good right now. I think it's tough. It's always tough because new laws are coming out, Chrome's changes, Google's lawsuits. There's always so much happening in the ad tech space. But the way I've really looked at it, and I think the way AdRoll has looked at it, is with change comes opportunity. And so how can you be innovative in this new normal? And that has been our approach. And, I like that. I like when you have to figure out how to do things differently. And I think we're set up for success there.
I love diving back into history and just looking at the partnerships that didn't necessarily make a company, but certainly had a profound impact on the way the company thinks about growth. And being someone who's a bit of a geek about this and sort of almost an anthropologist on the topic, you look back in history into the 70s, 80s, 90s, and you find that there was at some point a conversation that was had between two people, three people, four people that changed the trajectory of a business. And often that will have happened between businesses, not in the same business.
Yep.
To then strike up some kind of deal, and all of a sudden a product was born, a service was born, and then we fast forward 10 or 15 years, that conversation's been forgotten, and the company or the industry is very different to what it used to be. I would love to know if there is a story inside the next role kind of history point where there was a partnership that was quite defining for the organization, where it was, we probably wouldn't be here right now in our current form had we have not made that connection. Is there a story like that around the next role
Yeah.
history?
Yeah, ad tech changes so fast for it's sometimes hard to imagine a partnership lasting 15 years, but
Yeah.
I will speak to one that I was personally involved in about 4 years ago, and so that was when I took on Martech partnerships, and they were like, "So what's the plan?" And I was like, "Well, let me go and like try to figure out what is the best thing for us to do." And I don't think this is unique to a strategy at all, but I said, I really think we have to build a deep integration with Shopify. I think for what we're trying to do in e-commerce, we need to get brands early. They're not thinking about programmatic advertising. We're going to,
Mm.
later in the funnel. And if we don't get in early and help them grow, um, then we're not going to see that business later. They're going to go and do something else potentially. Maybe we will, but and so, and we can't just put an app in there. We need to really truly integrate and do something unique because no other programmatic platforms were in there. The walled gardens were, but at the time, the Trade Desk and Criteo and others didn't have integration. So we were a first mover there. It was hard because they don't typically at that time they didn't work with advertising partners, so the pricing had to be the rev share had to be unique and custom to us. And right now, Shopify and over the past few years has been our biggest acquisition source for self-serve advertising. But the bigger story there, I think, is that 25% of our managed customers come from our self-serve business. So in terms
Wow.
of a pipeline for getting customers in their early stages and helping them grow with us, I think Shopify is probably uh, the best partnership we have today that started 4 years ago. Yeah.
That's extraordinary, and there are countless examples where somebody's had the courage to go, actually, we need to help people grow and actually be generous in that act.
Yes.
I mean, we use the term generous. Often people will have had a very clear modeling idea about what the potential is if this works out. There's a story in Australia with one of our major banks called the Commonwealth Bank. And for years in the 1980s, they had what they call a dollar mite saver account, which was a savings account which was given to children or to parents for their
Of
children,
children.
where
Yeah.
pocket money was given, and it was a great financial step, obviously, for the bank at the time, and it persevered. But what it did was create such an immense brand connection in the minds of the child that by the time they got to age where they could transact and they had all their accounting needs, there was a no-brainer. So it sort of actually it created a foundation for the next generation of customers, which
Yeah.
obviously happened over a 20, 30, 40-year period, but it was quite an extraordinary step.
But that's partnerships, right? I think like
That's it.
you have to play the long game with partnerships. That's an awesome story.
Yeah, I love that. So, having to try and align a behemoth like Shopify, and we use Shopify here for a number of brands that we have, and we understand how it's matured and how we've seen those steps. And look, it can be very overwhelming for young brands to have to think about. Like there is a knowledge that yes, you've got to advertise well, and the more efficient you can make that, the better. But
Yep.
it can be overwhelming on launch to try and you've got a checklist that's 1,000 items long. Where does that sit? How does that work? So that's on the consumer side or the business owner side. But when you're thinking about aligning the kind of incentives and goals from what you've got here, yes, it's a long game, but how do you go about that thought to get your product aligned with someone as large as Shopify, who is wanting to do great work? Conceptually, it feels good, but then it's got to start somewhere, and no partnership ever sort of runs the course that it looks like on a piece of paper. So how did you go about that navigation of those early days to get to where you are now?
Yeah, I think, you have to recognize who you are in the market and what you have what you have to offer.
Hmm.
We are smaller than Shopify. We don't have as much revenue as Shopify. They are, the big fish in the pond. And so initially, they have a great app marketplace. So let's build into this app marketplace, and and leverage what we already have. And the thing that I think Shopify does really well is like it does make it easy for small brands. And so we set up recipes that was like, click this if you want to do cart abandonment, click this if you want to get people back to your website, click brand awareness if you want to get new customers. Right now we have much more complex campaign setups that we can do, but like how do we help people get in the door there? And once we had an app and we started to chat with them a little bit, I think we had an advantage because we were the first ad tech partner that was really leaning in. And what we had to offer was experience and knowledge around what's happening. And so I remember one of my first conversations early on with Ryan Peters over at Shopify and trying to figure out what to do in advertising. And I could tell he wanted me to help him navigate the landscape. And I was like, all right, put on your partnerships cap, not your AdRoll cap. And I was like, here are the partners that you should go and talk to. And I know some people at those companies. They are competitors, they're frenemies, but like, this is how you should navigate it. And then as things were happening with them wanting to build on an audience product, as things came up with changes on Chrome, like we were an educational consultant to them. And I think that really helped us build a strong relationship to them where we would get more support than maybe what our not what we deserve, but what they could be able to provide. And so we've always had a partner manager there who's been leaned in, and we've just consistently pushed the envelope on like, what are you doing for ads? This doesn't work for ads. What if we did it this way? What can we do here that's interesting? So that's what I think really helped us in that partnership, was saying we have knowledge we can share and help you out as you navigate this world.
Lizzie, you've nailed it. I mean, this is the thing that I think many people who intuitively think partnerships make sense in order to grow. It's actually being that education leader first, particularly when you can sense the idea that there is a knowledge gap that exists in the group that you're trying to partner with, and it's a free exchange, right? As soon as you're able to give them a sense that they don't have to have fear about knowing what they're walking into, that gets repaid in spades, which is very obviously what's gone on here.
Yeah, and what I've had like, once you build that trust, you can also be frank. So like if you're not getting access to a beta or something, you say, well, what do we need to do to get that? Like, and it opens up the opportunity to not like inch around things, but to actually have a real human conversation to figure out how you can both do business better together.
Yeah, look, that frankness goes into the next step, right? Which is, look, how do we create value together? More bluntly, how do we make more money together? And I often hear people speak about partnerships in a very romantic context, right? We would love to do work together, and we dance around this idea of, look, doing business together means making more money together. Yep. And when you have that sort of trusted relationship, it doesn't feel often as grating when people would say, so what is the deal here? How are you going to make money and how are we going to make money? Having that education lens first, I think, allows people to go, look, in order to make it worth your time and to make it worth ours, how do we find a way to put runs on the board, financial runs on the board? And so, in that partnership, it would have taken time for you to start putting those financial runs on the board. Was that a point of stress for you in the organization, or was the opportunity so large that it was sort of intuitive that, look, we just have to invest early, and you balance the tension between the innovation, the education, and the step of translating that into revenue?
No, it was stressful. It's not intuitive. I think this was still the early days of AdRoll entering MarTech partnerships, and I laid out this big plan that required our engineering team to build all these things, and then I had a longer list of things. Like I think with any tech integration partnerships, channels, it's a little bit easier to like get that revenue flowing really quick and seeing if there's an opportunity, but you spend the first 3 months, if you're lucky, building an integration that is a V1. And the partner's like, cool, you built this thing. That's great. You're going to start seeing some customers, but like, what about version 2, 3, 4? And so it's balancing like at each stage, setting expectations of like, this will at least get us in for Shopify specifically, but any partnership, the marketplace. We'll see some traffic from this, and we expect it to be this. If we go and build this next thing, that will actually open up doors for us to get into new products within Shopify. So this is for the Shopify relationship, but consistently seeing that customer acquisition as well. And I think that it's a constant battle. Like you're in where partnerships just one team. There's internal features you're going up against within the product prioritization, customer request, and so the one thing that I think always works is like we go and talk to customers and we say, what do you want? And what would it look like? And as soon as you have that, plus the partnership's willingness, it becomes easier to get that. But yeah, it's you're on a balancing beam all the time, trying to like figure out how much do we need to get to hit this marker, then how much do we need to get to hit this marker, and how do we balance that along the way?
Yeah, look, I think you've also nailed this idea that, version one of whatever you put in the hands of a customer is just that, right? And there needs to be a foresight around this will be the first step in a learning journey. And once that is known, then be prepared for version 2, whatever that looks like. Do not ever think that it's a one and done circumstance. And that lift, there's a really different lift profile for a small organization putting a lot into it. I've found a number of companies where that was the case, and we were so relieved to get version 1 out the door. We just wanted to try and exhale as that went out the door. But we hadn't sort of built the muscle to know that, we're going to get feedback on that very, very quickly. And you need to be resourced and excited to move into V2, knowing that it's probably going to get to V7, V8 before you start to see something really material play out.
Yeah, strategic tech partnership, product work doesn't really ever end. Like you are going to be working when you invest in it. There are some partners, you set it up, you set up the connection, you're good to go, kind of more on the ecosystem side of things, but you're just going to keep building and building and building if you want to maintain that. And I also, on the flip side, think you have to be really okay with like walking away from a partnership. And so what I can say is like Shopify was a huge success for us. And the thought across the company was like, well, let's go get in all the marketplaces, all the e-commerce marketplaces. And so we started to build, and we didn't see as much success in those marketplaces as we had in Shopify. Some do well, and we stopped at whatever step we thought was good enough for those. And others, I eventually said, like, I think we should deprecate this because it's just not worth it. I don't want to take away resources from a Shopify to put them into something else. So you have to be okay with both the outcomes because you're constantly building. If you don't say it's okay to walk away.
I totally get that. It's a good story, but I'm sure for every story like that, there are stories where it didn't work out so well. And we don't like to mention brands and names, but certainly there are some key elements in a partnership dynamic which sometimes mean that it just doesn't work out for whatever reason. And I think the element that people forget in approaching the idea of walking away or terminating a partnership is that, we've invested so much, there's going to be debt, sunk cost or technical debt, or even just debt, marketing debt that goes with all the effort that's gone into it. And they forget the idea that the time value of that investment is so high that when you say no to something, it just allows you to reprioritize into something else. Have you got an example of a partnership that maybe didn't work out so well, where in hindsight you might have gone, actually, we should have found a way to bring that to a close sooner, because given the writing was sort of on the wall, you've now seen that a few times and you now have an awareness for that when you're entering into other partnerships?
Yeah, I think, kind of what I was just talking about, like a few marketplaces e-commerce marketplaces that we entered, we eventually had to walk away from it. And one of the things that would come up is like to your point on the debt side, like well, we'll just leave the integration as is and we won't do any work on it. Well, then things start to break and you have customers complaining about it eventually. And so it's really important to do that. But, you know, with, I'm talking a lot about Shopify, but
it's a great platform.
It's a great platform. We went full force on it. Like, we partnered with all the ecosystem partners within the marketplace. We did a ton of co-marketing. We're constantly doing case studies around it. We were showing up at events and talking about Shopify. And then when we went and partnered with some of the other marketplaces, we didn't do that. Now, some of that was what the other marketplaces were willing to do, or other factors there, but we didn't put as much effort into it. And so I think ultimately we underestimated how much that exterior motion and momentum was carrying that partnership. But we didn't necessarily have the resources to do that for every single partner. And I just think you have to be okay with saying, all right, we're going to shut down this marketplace app because we're not supporting it how we need to from a product perspective, from a marketing perspective, from an operations perspective. And let's just keep putting all that momentum behind the partners that are working. I don't know if I answered your question directly, but
no, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, the interesting thing is, as somebody who's seen a lot of this now, and you mentioned before, your interest in the tools and technology that drives a lot of this underlying development in this arena is really admirable. When you're sort of sensing and trying to work out what is the next opportunity beyond these kind of things, what are you personally looking for? What are your signals from the market for you to go, actually, I think we should sort of put our toe in the water in this new pool because there's something there. Like, what is your instinctive sort of framework to go, actually, I think this could be really big for the organization? I mean, things like the e-commerce environment, like Shopify, are very well established now. 10 years ago, that was still emerging. So when you look at opportunities, how are you quantifying the opportunity before, like the instinct you have to make that work before you take it back to your team and your organization?
Yeah, I actually think the B2B side of our business is really interesting for this right now, because I think there's a lot of very interesting B2B tools coming out, sales tech and rev tech tools. AI is a big part of that, obviously. Some of it is like, I listen to podcasts, I read publications, I talk to people at conferences, I talk to my network. I do my own podcast that focuses on those tools, so I get to see firsthand what tools are coming up in the same categories, which ones are doing a better job, essentially. And it's like, all of a sudden you just start to hear more and more. Like, Clay's a good example of this. I'm like, I can't go anywhere and not hear about this tool, right? But that is like, I started to hear about it about a year ago. And I think if I go to a conference and I hear a name of a tool I haven't heard of 3 times, I'm like, oh, that might be a good thing to look into. So that's some of it. The other thing I'll just say is, like, when you're in partnerships, you have a bunch of partners. Talk to them about it. I mean, so much of my conversation, if I go out to dinner with a partner, I'm not talking about our partnership the whole time. That's what it calls for. And it's, I want to get to know them, but I also want to say, like, what else are you guys doing? And what is that, where are you guys investing, and who's doing some cool things out there? And you can use that partner network to really understand it. And then you go into all the research. You research about them, who their partners are, use a account-based mapping tool to see what the overlap is. You listen to customer feedback and obviously your customer teams to hear what they're hearing on the ground, before you decide, okay, let's see if there's actually an opportunity here.
What you're describing here is almost like an operating system for partnerships, where it's, as people that operate in this area, we know these things instinctively. When you try and build this into your team so that it's not just you having those conversations, not just you sort of gathering all that intelligence, making sense of it, and then spitting it back out to the organization, how have you organized your business to be part of that operating system, as opposed to it just being a couple of people that happen to be partnership experts in your business? Like, how does that work? And how do you think about that to try and scale that to make your job and the organization just more aware of the opportunity that comes with understanding this intelligence in the market?
Yeah, on the really magical thing about B2B is often your partners are your customers. And
Mm,
so they'll, on that side, we have some really strong account managers that I've built good relationships with. We'll have monthly calls or bi-weekly calls, and I'll say like, what's going on with your customers, and what are they doing, and are there partnership opportunities? And it's easier to prime that a little bit so that um, they're thinking about it as they're having conversations. And so that's a really great kind of like a cheat or a hack on the B2B side with
mm,
talking to other teams. Um, on the B2C side, it's a little more around like showing that partnerships help in sales and like driving that home and that upfront work. And then they're like, oh, maybe we could have more partners. So that's that side. On the product side is I think really around a boring concept, build by partner. And so just showing up and saying, here's how we could partner to do this. And making it really accessible and supporting the product engineering teams on what the options are. That's partner is not always going to be the choice, but at least always give them the option so that they're thinking about it anytime they're thinking about building a product. And it's consistently having those meetings and being in the room so that partnerships will be in a room you're not in.
that's it. And, do you have an ideal tempo for how partnership meetings should take place? I mean, I have in the first instance of new partnerships, we think about catching up quite regularly so we can form that early trust. But that doesn't mean that if we're meeting fortnightly to get a project off the ground, that it should then be that for the entire rest of the relationship. You can go into whatever tempo is required. How do you think about that initial tempo when you're courting a new partner and it's, look, I'd really like to get to know you so that we can work this out. I don't want to overwhelm you, and I want to try and find that really delicate balance between those two things.
Yep.
How do you think about that early engagement versus what happens when you're mid-flight?
Yeah, I think it's so interesting coming out of COVID when we weren't seeing people in person and how much in person has happened in the last year and a half or so. I think it's really important to get in person with people. I think it's
Yeah.
important to go out, do it if you need to do a workshop or a meeting, and then go to dinner or lunch or something. Because without that, it's just really you want to get to know the person, and so I think that in partnerships they're big. It's like a big sale,
Yeah.
and so I think that's like something that I've really been pushing me and the team and leaders in our business. Like, hey, we got to go meet these people and let's get this on the books. And then yeah, you're gonna have your weekly, product engineering call. We set up Slack channels, which I think is great because it just doesn't slow down the momentum
Mm.
that you have to wait for that call. Um, and then it becomes a little bit about partner preference and how much is going on. Some partners we have bi-weeklies, some we have monthlies, some it's like they'll reach out when they want to chat through something or we'll reach out. So it depends on the level of partnership and actually the partner's preference sometimes as well.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
When you think about hiring other people to be involved in partnerships, what are you looking for in the sort of behaviors or core skill set of an individual who might not have had a title of partnership before? What are you looking for in these people to help scale you inside an organization?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think someone who is just curious, like, and that's not the only thing, but it is a very important thing. They
Mm,
want to know like what's happening in the market, what are other companies doing in the market. They have to be curious about what are we building and what are our customer success and sales teams hearing in the market. They have to understand how operations works, and like they have to just want to learn and get to know people and build relationships internally and externally because ultimately a good partnerships person is like kind of dangerously good at everything. You might not have marketing support, you might not have product support, or direct like an engineering team dedicated. You might not have operations support. So how are you going to get those teams to help you do something? And being
Hmm.
curious about what are their blockers, what are they running into, so you can navigate that is extremely important, I think.
I think you're right, and it's interesting because um, often people who get bitten by the partnerships bug um, will have a very strange background on paper, and you shouldn't ever judge a book by its cover when you have a signal coming off of that curiosity. And they used to be an engineer, and all of a sudden they've moved into a business development facing role. Often that's a fantastic signal that there is a need to move out of that deep technical core expertise into a way that can be translatory, because there is so much detail lost in those conversations when that kind of expertise isn't there. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
You mentioned your podcast earlier. What is the name of that show for people who love understanding this kind of technology? Where am I pointing people to learn more
Yeah,
about that?
it's called the RevTech Podcast. It's on all the listening apps. We put it on YouTube as well, and do a bunch of clips on LinkedIn. So would love to get more people over there listening to it.
Yeah, let's point them to it. I think it's super useful, particularly for people that understand what they're looking at. There is a overwhelming tool set fatigue that I think people often have, and when you can get a person who can dive into it well, it's really super useful. Lizzie, I wanted to sort of move as we get to the back end of this conversation around how you see partnerships playing out over the next sort of 10 or so years, and not so much in the technology realm, but more around the world. There are people who are very optimistic about what partnership can bring to the world in all different sort of guises, right? Politically and from a business point of view, and certainly when we're trying to deal with really high impact and important problems. We intuitively know that it's better together, right? And they're trying to sort of maintain this point of view that you should go it alone is just very quickly eroding in most walks of life. So, what do you think leaders are missing when they espouse this idea of we need to partner with X, but they just don't know how to make that work? What are they missing?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think that some of it is like what we already talked about around partnerships take time and you need to invest in them, and that's a really important part of this. The other thing I think is something else we already talked about, like what do we have to offer? I think oftentimes leaders are like, "Oh, it would be great to ride this rocket ship." And I'm like, "Of course it would be." Like that that's what everyone wants to do. But what rocket ship are we offering to them to really help them? And I think that has to be the first thing that a partnership leader figures out with leaders and executives of like, what can we give to these other partners, whether that's education, whether that's their first for us ads product, whether that's something unique or that we're going to give them exclusivity. Like what is it's like the classic give to get, like what are we going to give, and then I'll go and have that conversation. um and I think that you have to think about partners almost the same way you think about customers. Like there's be customer obsessed. How can we be partner obsessed? And if you do that, like you said, it will pay back in spades. But until you do that, you're not just going to be able to jump on a rocket ship without providing your own one, or at least like some power to that rocket ship. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. And then the only other thing I would say is like attribution is still hard with partners. It's hard to really understand the value you're getting because you have a product feature that a partner built and source that directly to partner source revenue sometimes. And so I think there is a little bit of an art and a science for leaders to um, evaluate how our partnerships is going. It's getting better. We're getting better at attribution, but like there's a little bit of that intuition and being comfortable with how it will impact in the long term.
Yeah, you've nailed it. I think there is an interesting thing about how does an organization understand that if you can provide a clear value proposition, and this is marketing 101, but the number of times you hear this hand-waving set of nouns that are put forward in some kind of presentation where no one actually understands what it means, and people sort of nodding as if to say, keep going, give us the thing that we can wrap our heads around and know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, the greatest accelerant to a partnership moving in any positive direction is a clear ask and a clear offer. And if you can walk into those conversations, those doors open so quickly and you can walk through them quickly. And it's one of the 101 sort of steps. The other point that you made around attribution is interesting. We have a philosophy here when we coach organizations is to think about a new partnership as you are standing up an entirely new joint venture business. And I'm not talking about structuring it as a JV, but you sort of think about this as being, you are starting a startup. And right now there is zero value coming out of that engine. Forget about how much the shareholders are contributing to that new JV. Let's just mentally model the fact this is brand new. And you quarantine it. And as you see things come out of it, value and revenue and profit coming out of it, that's how you know. If you try to attribute that into your existing engine, it's very messy to do it that way. And that mental model we find really helps people go, oh yeah, it went from zero value to now it's now ultimately spitting out this number, and that's better than zero. So let's keep on working out how do we invest in this.
I love that model. I'm going to start using that.
Please do. Yeah. So Lizzie, I've got a rapid fire that I talk through everyone, and I just want to thank you for spending the time with me today. I've learned a bunch from you, and I'm so pleased to know that on this side of the world that we're talking the same language. It's been really fantastic. So let's dive into this rapid fire. You ready?
Yes.
All right, here we go. Complete this sentence. Partnership is
magical.
What content are you loving at the moment?
I am really loving the Marketecture podcast. I think it's a great podcast to get into the weeds and understand what's happening in ad tech.
Nice. What's the worst piece of advice you've received and why?
The worst piece of advice is like honing in, being asked to hone in my influence. I think that you, I'm trying to think of a politically correct way to say this, but I know this is a rapid fire, but I think you need to share your diverging thoughts from leaders in the business, even if you disagree, and there needs to be that diversity of thought. You have to operate well and not cause chaos in a business, but always use your influence to do what you think is right for the business.
Love that. So question 4, you see potential for a new partnership. What's the first thing you do to turn that potential into action?
Discovery. Read about them, learn about them, ask friends and your other partners about them, ask salespeople about what they're seeing, learn as much as you can, put together an initial thought of how that partnership could work before you reach out.
Nice. And final question, what's one thing you're truly grateful for right now?
My wife and dogs, and ski season happening soon.
I love that. Lizzie, thank you so much. Now, let's just remind people where we're going to point them to. Obviously, all this will be in the show notes, but remind us of your podcast and where people can connect with you, because I have a funny feeling that there'll be a bunch of folks who will want to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, it's called RevTech Podcast. You can find it on any platform. And then obviously head over to AdRoll.com or RollWorks.com to learn more about our advertising products.
Fantastic. Lizzie, thank you. It has been a real pleasure. And I'm looking forward to our next conversation. I think we've got a bunch to talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great.
Hey, it's Phil, and thank you so much for making it to the end of this episode of Partnership Plus. If you're one of the 61% of people who have discovered this episode and you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, please go ahead and do that. The bigger the channel, the bigger the guests. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next episode.